Hey, it's Jared with Gear and Light. Today I wanted to talk about shooting with a gimbal versus shooting handheld and just talk a little bit about how I decide whether I'm going to use a gimbal or shoot handheld. So first of all, what I have here is the Ronin gimbal. This gimbal is one of the best things on the market right now. It's just a fantastic gimbal. The SC2, I don't remember if they call it the Pro Edition or whatever, that comes with the Raven Eye module. This gimbal just really kind of does it all as far as handheld gimbals go. Of course, there's a lot of accessories and things for them that you can make them make this particular gimbal a little bit more into a traditional gimbal, but I like its versatility, and I wanted to talk a little bit about how I utilize it, and hopefully that will help you decide whether or not it's something that you need to add to your kit, or perhaps maybe not. So this gimbal right now has the Sony A1 on it with an IRIX 15mm cine lens. This is just how I've been using it recently, because the camera that I'm looking into right now is my Sony A7S III. That has a 45mm IRIX lens on it, and it is built out into more of a handheld shooting scenario, which I did a video on, my handheld rig video with the A7S III, so I'll make sure to link that if you want to check that video out next. I'd appreciate it, and I think that there's some good insight into how I set it up and why I set it up the way that I did. So a lot of times I try to avoid shooting with a gimbal if at all possible, because a gimbal does give it that, there's a gimbal feel to it. Now there's something to be said about handheld shooting, especially today with cameras that have stabilized sensors on them. It makes it much easier for you to shoot handheld and not worry about the stability of your shot, because the camera does a pretty good job. But when you're shooting with lenses that don't have stabilization, you're not getting really enough stabilization for all situations. So, for example, I shot handheld a music video because the music video is high energy, there's a lot going on, everybody else is moving, and I wanted the camera to feel like it was part of that environment. If everybody else was moving and jumping around and bobbing back and forth and doing all that stuff, and the camera was just kind of floating, it just wouldn't feel right. It wouldn't match the vibe of what was going on in the video. So a lot of times I will shoot handheld when there is movement and action and things happening, because I like the way that that feels better. I was shooting a video at a coffee shop just recently, and there were many times that I wanted to end up shooting handheld because there was a lot of movement going on. But when things are stationary and they're not moving, maybe something is going on within that shot, but for the most part nothing is moving, that is where I want to make sure that my shot is as stable as possible, and I will go to something like a gimbal to achieve that. So with this gimbal setup here, what's nice is that I'm able to control my focus right on the gimbal using the focus control motor. I can use focus peaking on the back of my camera to help out with making sure that I am getting tack sharp focus on whatever I am focusing on. Most of the time I am shooting on wider lenses, because that helps me get closer to whatever it is that I'm shooting, and that makes it easier for me to maintain focus also, because the longer the lens, the more challenging it's going to be, not only to hold this setup because the lens is going to be a lot longer, but also just because the focal plane is different, and it becomes a lot more trickier to maintain focus. And so majority of the time I'm either shooting with this lens here in manual focus, or if things are a little bit trickier and I can't have a shot repeated, then I will just shoot with an automatic lens and put a auto lens on there, and then I can allow the camera to do its autofocus thing. And usually the camera does a better job at achieving autofocus than I do manually, unless this situation is more controlled. So with this setup here, I keep this bar off the back here, because if I'm going into more of a lower situation where I'm holding the camera down lower, I will take the tripod off of the gimbal and move it up here so that I can go into more of an underslung held position and that makes it much easier to carry. I also have the phone mount over here because I have been utilizing the Raven Eye lately. Being able to use the bigger screen on my phone is nice, and then of course I can also use focus peaking on there as well. And as long as I keep everything nice and close together, there's really not much latency at all. Of course, I'm primarily looking at the screen on the back of the camera because that gives me the fastest view of what I'm seeing, but having that screen right in front of me that is a little bit bigger definitely helps out a lot. So the Raven Eye is worth it in most situations, just because of that. So I've talked about when I typically decide to use a gimbal versus not. I do tend to use the gimbal less than a person should probably owning a gimbal. This gimbal does not get used too much because most of the time I'm shooting videos where I'm locked off on a tripod or I want handheld action. But there are a lot of situations where I can't put a tripod. When I was filming in the coffee shop, I was back behind the counter. This was during operating hours. We wanted a lot of movement, a lot of things going on. We wanted the ambience of the coffee shop to be captured as well. And so I can't set up a tripod and get a shot of an espresso pour. I need to be handheld, and shooting with the gimbal made that much easier because there wasn't much action moving there. There was just the flow of the espresso. So I wanted to be more stable than I would be if somebody was actually grabbing the espresso and doing the pour or moving around. I might be handheld because I would feel more like I'm moving with them, and I would do my best to stabilize the shot with the camera against my body so that I am getting a good stable shot, but I also have a physical type of movement which is different than what you can get on a gimbal. So the gimbal's great, and there are many uses for the gimbal, but I do think that people use gimbals too often, and I think they shoot handheld not often enough. So if you find yourself using a gimbal too much, I highly recommend that you take your camera off of your gimbal and you shoot handheld, and you work on your just camera movements and holding the camera in a way where you can keep it stable, whether it is utilizing some form of attachment to your camera where you can rest part of that against your body and keep the camera from rocking and shaking, and using your body kind of to stabilize, or figuring something out there. I think handheld without a gimbal is the best way to go if you can make it happen. But if you can't, you know, it's not for everyone. A gimbal is definitely an alternative and a great way to go if you can't figure out a way to hold the camera steady enough without the gimbal. Of course, if you don't have a camera that has any form of stabilization and you don't have any lenses with stabilization, that's a whole nother issue at hand. That becomes really hard to hold a camera still handheld, and you're definitely going to need some assistance there. So depending on the equipment that you have, you definitely have to take that into account as well. Given the modern technology and the Sony cameras and many of the other cameras with the in-body stabilization and all of that stuff, even though the lenses, most of them are not stabilized, I definitely am able to get shots that I find very usable. Don't even necessarily need to add any stabilization in post. Sometimes I do, but often don't need to add any stabilization in post because I'm able to keep the camera still enough to where it's matching the movement of my scene, whatever it is that I'm shooting. So I hope that this video, people ask me like, why are you shooting handheld? Do you have a gimbal? Do you use a gimbal? Which gimbal do you use? Why don't you use a gimbal more? These are the kind of questions that I get, and that's why I decided to make this video. If you want to see more about how I use a gimbal setup, definitely let me know down in the comment section. I can come back and make a gimbal related video, or even a handheld shooting related video, which I think I would really like to do because people are asking me how I manage to shoot handheld, and then also how do I manage to shoot handheld and also manual focus the camera by myself. So those might be topics of interest, but let me know what you think down in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video and that you subscribe to the channel here on Gear and Light. But that's going to do it for today, so I hope to see you back in the next one. Take care.